November 1977, Moscow. The air is sharp and damp, and the city feels like it's built from stone and authority. Deep inside a government building, where the corridors swallow footsteps, a small group of men sit around a table that looks too polished for the era. On the surface, it's a routine planning set. Another year, another 5-year plan, another set of targets that will be announced like destiny. But the real meeting isn't about tractors or textile or the needs of the people. It's about a single stream of money that doesn't come from the plan at all. It comes from beyond the border. It comes from the world market. And here's the shocking claim. Under Brezhnev, the Soviet Union became a superpower that could function only because one ministry turned oil into hard currency and turned hard currency into stability. Not a slogan, not an ideology, a cash machine. And when that machine became the center of everything, it quietly rewired the state itself. The mystery question is this: how did a socialist empire that claimed to be self-reliant end up depending on a ministry that sold raw materials to capitalists just to keep its own system working? By the end of this story, you'll understand how Brezhnev's era of stability was funded, why reforms kept getting postponed, why shortages didn't trigger change when they should have, and why the most powerful institution in the late Soviet Union wasn't always the one with the loudest speeches. It was the one with access to dollars. In a second, you'll see why. In the Kremlin, oil wasn't just an industry, it was the budget. Most people think Brezhnev's USSR ran on ideology and fear, with the military and the security services pulling the strings. That's the myth. The real story is that late Soviet power ran on logistics and payments. Ideology set the stage, yes. Fear enforced the rules, yes. But neither ideology nor fear can make wheat appear when the harvest fails. Neither ideology nor fear can buy precision equipment from abroad. Neither ideology nor fear can pay a foreign bank. For that, you need something the Soviet system couldn't print: hard currency. So start with the simplest truth that made the Ministry of Oil feel like magic. Inside the USSR, rubles were a command tool. The state could issue them, allocate them, and force everyone to accept them. But outside the USSR, rubles were not a passport. Foreigners didn't want them. If Moscow needed wheat, meat, machine tools, chemicals, or electronics from the West, it had to pay in real money the outside world trusted. Dollars, marks, yen. Call it hard currency. Call it real money. Call it oxygen. Without it, the Soviet system suffocated. Now here's the part nobody talks about. The Soviet Union could run a lot of its internal life by moving rubles around and ordering production. But the moment it needed something from outside food imports after a bad harvest, technology to close a gap, spare parts for imported equipment, it hit a wall. You can't command the wall to move. You either pay or you don't get the goods. And when you understand that, you can see why one ministry rose like a shadow king, because it could generate the one thing nobody else could: hard currency at scale. Under Brezhnev, the oil ministry didn't just pump crude, it pumped leverage. Picture the Soviet economy as a body. Steel is bone, coal is muscle, railways are veins, factories are organs, but hard currency is oxygen. It's the invisible ingredient that lets everything else function smoothly, especially when the domestic organs are sick. Brezhnev inherited an economy that had achieved enormous industrial scale, but also enormous inefficiency. Factories hit targets on paper. Warehouses filled with the wrong goods. Agriculture struggled. Consumer life lagged. There were chronic weak points the plan could not fix quickly. Then, oil entered the story like a cheat code. In the late 1960 seconds, and through the 1970 seconds, the Soviet Union expanded oil production dramatically, especially from the vast fields of Western Siberia. This was not a gentle expansion. It was a national mobilization, drilling in brutal weather, building pipelines across impossible distances, creating whole new industrial towns. The scale was staggering. And then the world did something that changed everything. Global oil prices surged in the 1970s. Suddenly, every extra barrel exported wasn't just a commodity sale. It was hard currency. And hard currency was freedom. Not freedom in a political sense, freedom in a crisis management sense. The freedom to import grain when the harvest disappointed. The freedom to buy industrial equipment to patch productivity. The freedom to bring in consumer goods that made life feel less harsh. The freedom to subsidize allies. The freedom to pretend the plan was working. Here's the first rehook to keep in your head. Once a system finds a way to buy time, It starts living on time instead of fixing problems. Brezhnev's famous stability wasn't free, it was financed. Now watch how the oil ministry turned into the ministry that funded everything. It happened in 3 moves. Move 1. Oil exports became the primary source of hard currency. Manufactured exports rarely brought in the same reliable revenue because much Soviet output wasn't competitive on global markets. But oil was. The world always wanted oil. And in the 1,970 seconds, the world paid a lot for it. Move 2. Hard currency became the pressure valve for every domestic week. Short of grain? Buy it. Short of consumer goods? Import them. Need advanced machine tools? Purchase them. Each import didn't solve the structural issue, it covered it. But coverage reduces pressure. Reduced pressure delays reform. Delayed reform deepens the weakness. So the plan's failures no longer forced change, they triggered import. Move 3. The center began planning as if the valve would always work. Leaders, ministries, and regional bosses started budgeting their demands around the assumption that oil money would stay high. That's the psychological flip that turns a windfall into a dependence. Most people think the USSR became stagnant because leaders were lazy or old. That's too simple. The deeper truth is that oil revenue made stagnation politically survivable. It turned fix it into patch it. It turned reform into risk and patching into routine. That choice can look wise for a year, for a decade, it becomes destiny. Now let's make this real with a mini story. A Soviet planner sits with reports from the civilian economy. Production quotas met, productivity improving, everything on schedule. He knows the reports are massaged. Everyone massages reports, so he also listens to quieter signals. Shortages, transport delays, complaints from local party officials. He understands that the plan is not delivering what it promises. Then he opens the hard currency file. It shows export revenues from oil and gas, and a list of import purchases, grain, meat, equipment, even consumer goods that will quietly appear in better stores. The planner realizes something unsettling. The domestic plan is becoming theater. The real stabilizer is the import list. And the import list depends on oil. At that moment, the oil ministry is no longer an industry. It is the financial heart. And that is why, within the Soviet system, the oil ministry's requests started getting treated like survival need. More pipe, more rigs, more rail cars, more steel allocation, more skilled labor. It could always argue its case. Give us resources now, and we'll bring in hard currency later. That argument beat almost everyone else's argument. If a consumer goods ministry asked for steel, it promised more washing machines for citizens. Nice, but politically uncertain. If the oil ministry asked for steel, it promised dollars. Dollars could buy washing machines. Dollars could buy grain. Dollars could buy calm. In a system obsessed with stability, dollars were the ultimate promise. Here's the rehook. The oil ministry didn't compete with other ministries on ideology. It competed on solvency. Now we need to talk about the cash machine's internal wiring, because the Soviet oil miracle had its own dangerous incentives. In the plan, oil production was measured in volume, tons, barrels, deliveries. Success was more, not more efficiently, not more sustainably, just more. And when the whole state starts depending on your more, the pressure becomes relentless. Every harvest failure, every industrial bottleneck, every consumer shortage, every foreign policy commitment, someone somewhere could make a case that the solution was more hard currency and therefore more oil export. So the oil ministry became a pressure point where the entire empire leaned its weight. Mini story number 2. An oil field manager in Western Siberia receives a target increase. He looks at the equipment, some of it is aging, maintenance is behind, the weather is brutal. He knows he can hit the target by pushing the wells harder and deferring maintenance. He also knows that doing this will increase water intrusion, reduce long-term output, and make future extraction more expensive. But his career is judged on this year's target, not the field's health 10 years from now. The country needs exports now, so he pushes. The numbers look great. Moscow breathes easier. The future quietly worsens. This is how a cash machine starts eating its own gear. It's not moral failure, it's incentive design. And now we arrive at the most important mechanism. Oil revenue didn't just fund imports. It funded the illusion that the system could keep its promises. Brezhnev's political model depended on a social contract. You don't challenge the party, and the party delivers stability jobs, basic goods, predictable prices, a slow improvement in living standards. Not abundance, but predictability. Oil money made predictability cheaper. When something broke, you could import your way out of embarrassment. But predictability is addictive. Once citizens get used to a certain level of provision, even a modest one, taking it away feels like betrayal. Oil revenue raised expectations quietly. It didn't create paradise. It created a baseline that the system could not later sustain without the same revenue. Most people think the USSR fell because citizens suddenly wanted Western luxury. The real story is simpler. They wanted reliability. And oil was the hidden sponsor of reliability. Now we zoom out to see how the ministry funded everything, not just domestically, but globally. The Soviet Union had clients and allies. It supported friendly governments. It maintained influence in Eastern Europe. It provided subsidized energy and favorable trade terms. It shipped arms. All of that had costs. When oil money was strong, those costs could be carried without immediate pain at home. The cash machine didn't just keep Soviet shelves stocked, it kept Soviet influence intact. So the ministry didn't merely fund the economy, it funded the empire. Here's a bigger rehook that flips the story. Brezhnev's strength was not simply military power. It was financial flexibility bought from the world oil market. And financial flexibility is fragile when it depends on a price you cannot control. Now, let's correct a few myths sharply, because these myths hide the mechanism. Most people think the Soviet Union didn't need the West, but the real story is that the Soviet system quietly relied on Western grain, technology, and sometimes credit and oil was how it paid. Most people think planning means control, but the real story is that planning can hide failure until a hard constraint exposes it. Hard currency was that constraint. Most people think oil wealth automatically makes a country strong, but the real story is that oil can make a system postpone reforms and become brittle because it turns structural problems into purchasable inconveniences. Most people think Brezhnev's era was stable because it was competent, but the real story is that the stability was financed by a windfall, and windfalls teach bad habits. Most people think the key institutions were the party and the security services, but the real story is that money, specifically hard currency, was the quiet power behind decisions, and the oil ministry controlled the faucet. Now, we push into the suspense. What happens when the whole state treats the oil cash machine as permanent? It starts making commitments it can't easily reverse. More imports, more subsidies, more investment promises, more military procurement, more expectations. The state's spending doesn't just rise in rubles, it rises in real obligations that require foreign purchases. Even domestic modernization starts depending on imported tools and components. Each imported machine creates a future requirement for imported spare parts. That's how dependency deepens without anyone signing a dramatic agreement. And when dependency deepens, the cash machine becomes the only thing keeping the system breathing. Now, mini story number 3, a Politburo discussion about consumer dissatisfaction. They can't openly admit the plan is failing because admitting that undermines legitimacy. They can't easily restructure the economy because restructuring threatens powerful interests and risks disruption. But they can authorize new imports, meat, sugar, shoes, machinery to relieve pressure quickly. Someone asks the obvious question, where does the hard currency come from? The answer is unspoken, but understood. The oil ministry will cover it. The meeting ends with a decision that feels like leadership, but is really dependency. Buy time. That's the Brezhnev method in one breath. Spend oil money to postpone hard choices. Now, the ominous part. The world oil market is not loyal. It doesn't care about your ideology. It doesn't care about your 5-year plan. It doesn't care about your prestige. Prices rise and fall based on global supply and demand, and the decisions of producers outside your control. If your state budget and political stability are built around high prices, you are living in a house where the foundation moves. Brezhnev's era benefited from high prices. The machine worked. The state looked strong. But in building that machine into the center of everything, the USSR made itself fragile in a very specific way. It tied its survival not only to oil production, but to oil price. This is the moment the story turns dark, because fragility can sit quietly for years and then reveal itself in weeks. When prices later fell in the mid-1982, it wasn't just a reduction in revenue. It was a systemic shock. It meant fewer dollars. Fewer dollars meant fewer imports. Fewer imports meant more shortages. More shortages meant more political tension. More tension meant harder decisions. And the system had spent years avoiding decisions. So when decisions arrived, It had no muscle. But don't oversimplify it. The USSR had other problems: stagnation, bureaucracy, military burdens, and an industrial structure that struggled to innovate. Oil didn't cause those. Oil disguised them. And that's why oil's decline later didn't just hurt it exposed. Here's the bigger rehook. Oil didn't collapse the USSR by itself. Oil made the USSR dependent enough that any sustained decline in oil income turned chronic weakness into acute crisis. Now, go back to the title, the ministry that funded everything. Why does that matter? Because when one institution becomes the funding source for all others, it reshapes power. The oil ministry could demand investment and get it. It could demand the best materials and get them. It could demand priority transport and get it. It could demand political protection for its project. And it could use its success to defend itself. If you starve us, you starve the whole state's hard currency. That's a level of leverage no ordinary civilian ministry possessed. Over time, that leverage creates a feedback loop of privilege. The ministry gets the best resources, which improves its performance, which increases its leverage, which gets it more resources. Meanwhile, other sectors, especially consumer and agricultural sectors, remain under-resourced, which keeps their performance weak, which increases reliance on imports, which increases reliance on the oil ministry's hard currency, which increases the ministry's leverage again. The whole system tilts toward oil. This is why you can have a country with extraordinary industrial capacity and still not have good consumer life. It's not that the country can't produce. It's that priorities and incentives are skewed toward what maintains state power in the short term, not what builds broad productivity in the long term. Now, the final payoff, the click. Brezhnev's USSR built a state that could function with its internal inefficiencies because the oil cash machine compensated. It turned oil into dollars, it turned dollars into imports, it turned imports into calm. It turned calm into political stability. And political stability became the justification for continuing the same structure that required the oil cash machine in the first place. The USSR didn't simply have an oil sector, it had an oil-funded governing strategy. And that's why the oil ministry wasn't just another ministry, it was the institution that allowed the Soviet leadership to avoid confronting the system's deepest contradiction: the promise of abundance without the productivity to support it, the promise of modernization without the incentives to innovate, the promise of stability without the flexibility to adjust when the world changed. So end with an image. Picture a pipeline stretching westward under forests and fields, carrying crude toward foreign buyers. Each kilometer is steel and engineering, yes, but also policy. That pipeline is a decision. We will pay for our stability by selling raw material to the outside world. Now picture Moscow's leaders reading reports that look good while quietly depending on that flow to buy grain, buy machines, buy time. And picture, years later, what happens when the flow of money per barrel thins and the same system tries to keep buying time with a weaker currency stream. Brezhnev's oil cash machine made the Soviet Union look like it had solved its economic problems. In reality, it had only found a way to postpone them at scale for years, brilliantly and quietly. And the most haunting part is this: the better the machine worked, the less urgent change felt. Which means the ministry that funded everything also funded the one thing the system needed most to survive denial.